everybody. Welcome to another edition of Tommy Chris TV. Our guest today is Mike McKay. You're a musician, radio personality, baseball enthusiast.
Yeah, that's true.
You like to read books.
Yeah.
All right, so what do you do in your spare time when you're not doing those things?
That's a good question. That takes up a lot of it. The online world, and I'm not addicted to it by any means, but I think what that technology has made possible is to connect with a lot of people that share your interests.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I joined AOL in 1993, it was like a revelation. Wow, there's actually other people out there who, as crazy as I am about my interests. From an early age, I kind of grew up with broadcasting all around me, although it was primarily TV in those days. Both my aunt and uncle were at WFMJ Channel 21 starting in the early to mid-50s. I believe that's where they met, in fact, and got married. And my uncle had a very long career there, working through to be film director and ultimately program director. My aunt worked there for a time and then after that would freelance, with writing, copywriting, and that sort of things. I kind of grew up with that all around me.
And it kind of drew you into it?
It did. I knew before too long that I said, well, here's the way I put it. My uncle was film director, and at the age of 5 or something, he took me down into the film department, gave me my own private screening of Popeye cartoons. I said, boy, this is the business for me to do as well.
Who else did you like when you were...
Well, my favorites, and this kind of ties in with the TV station, because in those days, they ran those films. You used to have, after-school local hosts that did shows for kids, and they bought the old film library, so I was one of those lucky kids in the 50s and 60s that grew up exposed to the great Warner Brother cartoons, the Popeye cartoons.
We did too, we loved them.
And especially Laurel and Hardy and our gang, who I still am passionate about to this day. I mean, I'm the guy that knows every bit player in every one of those films, and they just, I don't know, they had a lot of heart. They were made by the Hal Roach Studios. They had a lot of heart to them, in addition to being extremely funny.
Trivia, you like trivia too, right?
Well, yeah, I guess inevitably, when you combine those passions of the old movies, popular culture generally, and especially music. I mean, I'm one of those that not only played the music, I lived it, and, while I can't remember what I had for dinner yesterday, I can remember every member of every one-hit wonder band of the 1960s. I can name them all off. That's
amazing.
That's just part of what you get into. And you mentioned something about online. That's something that I was fortunate enough to do, too. Back in about 95, when I was still on AOL, a group of people coalesced in one of those trivia rooms. And again, like I said, people who were even more nuts than I was in terms of what they knew and their knowledge about music. Mm-hmm. Ever since then, every Friday night, we have gathered together and played music trivia. It's the group kind of sort of stabilized around maybe 12 or 13 members or so.
Sounds like fun.
And starting in 2000, the virtual gatherings became real-time gatherings. We started coming, luckily, to Cleveland, which is where it's held, so it's not far for me to go, but people from all over, California, New York City, Alabama, Kentucky, gather over Memorial Day weekend, and we do in real time what we do online the rest of the year. It's great fun. Two others besides me are named Mike and Michael. One of them plays guitar, the other one sings, so part of the gathering is always a jam session on Friday nights. It's been known to go till 4 o'clock in the morning, where we just pull songs out of the ether and sing them together. So so we're the three mics. So the three mics is part of the
We'll come back to that, but I wanted to ask you about your education. Your background is formally, that is, in media too, isn't it?
Yeah, I went to Ohio University after I graduated from Boardman High School and majored in communications, got a degree in radio and television. Again, that's what I wanted to do with myself, and following graduation, I was in the business for a little over 15 years, I think.
Your first radio job?
First real radio job, if you don't count spinning the classical records on the school station, when I was a peon that just started.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
The first one that really counted was actually at the commercial station in Athens, the station that wasn't associated with Ohio University. Mm-hmm. I got a job playing what in those days was known as underground rock.
Mhm.
And I always say it's the best radio job I ever had, because in those days, management didn't know anything at all about the music. And they were happy to leave music selection entirely in the hands of the disc jockey. So for 5 hours, 6 nights a week, I could play whatever I wanted to.
Boy, if times
on
changed.
that
huh?
station. Yeah, it wasn't too long before that went out the window, and even stations that purported to be non-mainstream became just as formatted as any other station would be.
You came back. When did you come back to?
Came back after I graduated in 1973.
Oh, okay.
I had made some connections in the radio market here. I knew some people. So first radio job I got after I graduated was at a country station. It was at the old WNIO, back when they were still back in the woods on Webb Road there.
Right.
Up to that point, I knew next to nothing about country music, country rock maybe, but real country music, I was just totally off my radar. I was a rock and roller, and I thought to myself, I'm going to be playing this stuff again 5 hours a day, 6 days a week. I better learn to like it, or I'm going to be in big trouble. Well, it turns out I did. It turns out I did come to like the music that was out at the time, the country music that was on the charts contemporaneously. That kind of led me back to examine the roots a little bit more. And as I did that, I came to find out that my favorite era of country music is roughly late 40s to the mid 50s, which takes in Hank Williams, Lefty Frizzell,
Sure.
the original Ray Price, Webb
classics.
Pierce, all those guys,
It reminds me of a little thing I saw on TV one time. They were interviewing this old country guy. It wasn't a musician or anyone famous. They were just talking to him about country music. They happened to ask him what he thought about today's country music, and he says, well, if I can't fish or hunt to it, I don't like it.
Well, I have a feeling he and I would be on the same page. For an awful lot of people, again, I said how it was off my radar. To this day, it is off the radar of a lot of folks who are mainstream who have no idea how hard those guys worked in the 50s. I mean, the old cliche of having a station wagon where they strapped the bass fiddle to the roof of it and drove 300 miles between gigs, that's all true. That happened. Those guys worked so hard, and they had musicians in the top bands that were easily the equal of any of the mainstream jazz musicians that everybody knows so much about, or the big band. I'm just saying that contemporaneously, with all the stuff that most people think of in, say, the 40s and the 50s, there was this country scene with fantastic musicians, great songwriters, but they were doing their thing primarily in the South and the West, Western swing, that sort of thing. And there's so many people that really don't know about that, and it's a wonderful, fascinating period.
Texas swing is good.
Yeah, Western swing, Texas swing, it's great stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Transfer did that.
What's that?
Well, didn't the Transfer do the Texas swing?
Yeah, they did a whole CD on Texas swing once. It was we have that somewhere.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Your first radio job, how nervous were you? Okay. Do you remember the moment that you walked in there and said, okay, this is the real deal now, I got to go on the air here, and I'm a little jittery?
I don't think so, because I was one of those kids that grew up. I had a little 3-inch Japanese reel-to-reel tape recorder, and like junior high and high school, maybe even before, I would sit there, turn on the tape, pretend I was on the air, pretend I was announcing, and I think
It was in you.
Yeah, and I think growing up and seeing it around me, I don't think that I was particularly nervous.
You're an archivist too, aren't you? I mean, you're a collector of sorts that
I have a lot of music, if you want to put it that way, in terms of albums and books and everything.
A lot of vinyl.
Yeah. I mean, easily over 5,000 albums, 45.
Well, I'd say that's a collector.
Every media. Well, but collectors, I don't go about it formally the way people do.
Oh, no,
I mean, there are people that have got to have every single, version of the album cover or whatever. I knew guys, it always amazed me. I knew a guy I used to trade stuff with, and I would have things of value that he wanted. He wanted this cover variation. He wanted this rare pressing or whatever. I knew 2 guys like that, as a matter of fact. I knew another guy that had collected by label, had every single number, 45 that, say, on Atlantic Records or something like that. But you know what? I never heard either of those guys ever once say, boy, I really like that song. I really like that group. They were possessions to them.
Yeah.
I'm in it for the
You're
music.
more focused on the music
I'm
itself,
in it for the music.
Sure.
So, if I
That's
have
a good
something,
point.
it's
That's
'cause
an
I-
interesting
yeah.
point, because
Yeah.
that never occurred to me, that
Yeah.
collectors are all about the collecting.
Yeah, I mean, and some of them are genuinely into the music too. I guess I've just never done it quite as manically or formally as some of them do.
Yeah, you might kill me for saying this, but I put a lot of vinyl on the curb.
Oh,
I
why
did.
didn't you tell me?
Well, I didn't know. If I knew, I would have. But
Yeah.
I called Underdog, and I called them all. I called them all that
Mm-hmm.
that were, and everybody said basically the same thing, that, oh, I can't take any more vinyl.
No, we went to Goodwill.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it went under the curb.
No.
Well, that's good.
Goodwill's.
That's good. At least there's a chance of somebody else getting it then, you know.
Yeah,
It's possible.
well, that's true.
And that depends how many years ago that was, too. I think there's been a resurgence in more
Yes.
recent years
Yeah.
of interest in vinyl, not only the old collectible stuff, but contemporary bands are putting albums out on vinyl now.
Yeah.
You know,
I
high
noticed
quality,
that.
and it's the old argument about a really good vinyl pressing will always sound better than a CD, and that's counterintuitive. But if you play vinyl on a good system that's been well cared for, it's going to be a more pleasurable listening experience. That seems to be the
It's probably like the difference between 2-inch tape and digital media. It's possible. You know,
Yeah.
that 2-inch presence is
sure.
really something to hear. I mean, it's like right up
Sure.
in your face, so to speak.
Sure.
And it's real interesting. Nobody uses it anymore. Some people are going back to it. But that 2-inch tape really had a presence of sound to it that
Yeah.
I have not heard duplicated.
I like the crackles. I like it.
She likes the scratches.
You know, I love all that, I don't know.
It's funny.
Yeah.
There's albums that I have that I can still hear the imperfections of.
Yes.
The second album I ever bought in my life was Big Hits, High Tide, and Green Grass, the greatest hits collection of the Rolling Stones. It came out in about 65, 66 or so. And to this day, when I hear The Last Time, which is still my favorite Stones song of all time, to this day, when I hear The Last Time, I subconsciously hear the little cue burn, as they used to call it, the little scratch that came in at the beginning when the riff still started.
On the guitar, the little scratch sound on the guitar? you
No,
mean?
no, it was on the vinyl. It was on my copy of the vinyl.
Oh, your copy, okay.
You know, and I
Yeah.
still subconsciously hear that.
I'll bet you any money that in the old days, when you were playing in a band and you guys were learning a song off the vinyl record and it skipped, you learned to skip.
Could be.
We used to learn to skip. You're also involved in advertising.
Well, that's my job now. I worked in radio for 15-plus years or so, and in 1988, I got a job at a local advertising, marketing, and public relations agency. I've been there ever since.
Tell us how that
I always say
happened.
it's a stunning tribute to total lack of ambition that I'm still doing that, but
How does a guy like you get into, I mean, you're so musically inclined and media inclined, and how did you get into, I guess it kind of connects.
the way that happened was the owner of the agency happened to put a classified ad in the paper looking for voice talent, and a lot of people in radio will do that on the side. They'll freelance and announce commercials. I wrote a letter to him, included a cassette, in the days of cassettes, of some commercials that I'd cut, and I had the sense to, in my cover letter, say, you know, this isn't all that I do. I also can write, you know, I have, media knowledge of one sort or another, and it just so happened that he had a client that needed some extra work. So I started there as a part-timer, and within a month or two, I managed to wheedle my way into a full-time job, and I've been there ever since. Like that.
I could tell you nightmares about my copywriting.
Yeah, I know
stations.
I know that's something that you did. I know it's something
Yeah.
you used to do. I remember that.
It wasn't a pleasant experience.
Yes. Well,
when you write something and it comes back to you with insulting little notes on it from the salespeople, you know.
I
it's
was
like-
probably the guy writing the insulting notes. I'm sorry. I apologize. That was probably me. But
Yeah.
it's a small agency, so we wear a lot of hats there. I kind of just learned by doing to create databases, which are useful in some of the work that we do.
Davis and McKay, your music duo. Now, how long have you been doing that?
Well, the roots of that's the acoustic duo that I've been playing in with my partner Denny since about 2001, but then we go back farther than that. For 10 years prior to that, we had a 4-piece acoustic band called Power Cut with 2 other good friends, And if you go back even farther than that, we had a regular full electric band playing mostly 50s, 60s, 70s stuff back in the mid-'80s called Fair Warning. That was Fair Warning.
Okay.
And that's where Denny and I first started, actually. So he and I have been playing together.
No one can save us from killing the waitress. No one can save us but killing the waitress. Nobody can save us but kill the waitress. Always turns me. Sometimes she comes with coffee, leaning over pouring. I like to gently pump her tulip and kiss her without warning.
We talked about the Beatles earlier. Would you say that they're your all-time favorite band?
You know what? They're almost in a category by themselves. It's almost kind of goes without saying in terms of what they created, what they made possible. And a lot of people, when they think of the Beatles, they think of the latter part of their career when they were really forging new paths, and I have tremendous respect for that. I think Strawberry Fields Forever is one of the most remarkable 4 minutes ever put on wax by anybody. But what people often don't realize, and a whole book was written on this subject, is how innovative they were at the beginning. Those early songs that people who don't know any better just kind of dismiss, oh, that's a silly love song, to use Paul McCartney's term for it, were incredibly innovative in terms of the music, in terms of the chord changes, in terms of the harmonies. They were doing stuff in '63 and '64 that, while it had roots going back to Buddy Holly and girl groups and Motown and those sort of things, they did it in a completely unique way that people don't realize just how innovative it really was.
Well, Lennon was interviewed a long time ago. It may have been, I don't know what magazine it was, but I read, it might have been Rolling Stone. It's been a long time. But the White Album, during the White Album, he was interviewed, and there was one question that stuck out in my mind, and somebody asked him, why have you stuck to, with all the changes that are going on in music, with Jimi Hendrix and all the underground things that were coming out, the psychedelic thing was happening at the time, why have you stuck to that 3.5 minute format? And Lennon's reply was, and it's classic Lennon, of course, he was always very witty and bright and always had this wonderful quip, and he said, well, if you can't say what you want to say in 3.5 minutes in a song, then forget it.
That's a pretty good point. There's some long form stuff that I do like, but generally I agree with that.
Yeah.
And there are people, I love a broad swath of music. I have tremendous fondness for the top 40 music of starting in '63, which is roughly when I started listening. In '67, you had the West Coast, San Francisco, underground, and suddenly, that was amazing because you weren't necessarily confined to the 3-minute pop song. You could stretch a little bit, and the best of those people were wonderful.
Take away the Stones and take away the Beatles, okay, because those two bands were kind of in a class of their own. Who do you like?
Going back, well, I can take it by era, I suppose. The early rockers I love, and I've played their music forever, starting with Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Little Richard, all those guys, Eddie Cochran. And I always leave somebody out when I go through these, Everly Brothers, people like that. In the wake of the Beatles came bands that I love, like, the Searchers, the Kinks in particular. The Kinks had such an amazing career going through so many.
Did you ever like any of the progressive bands like Yes and Genesis and those bands?
I liked Yes's first 3 albums because they were very melodic and had wonderful harmonies, and I think the more they went on, the more they kind of It was like being complicated for complicated's sake, and they lost the heart of it to me and became more about how many notes can we play in 20 seconds. Most of the so-called progressive bands like that, I can respect their musicianship, but they don't speak to me too much.
Yeah.
When all of that stuff hit, the early 70s, and this gets back to favorites, while that was going on and I was feeling increasingly alienated from mainstream rock and roll, I went to what they called power pop at the time, which was Beatles-influenced bands such as Raspberry, such as Badfinger, and one of my great favorites, Big Star, which has become a cult band with down the road, but at the time very few people knew about. They were doing the same kind of melodic rock and roll with a little bit of power behind it that I loved. And that takes you up to about 76 when punk hit. To my mind, punk was a very needed correction to the kind of bloated animal that rock and roll had become. Again, back to the virtues of simple pop songs delivered with power, with a total lack of pretense. And I never really got into the political side of punk so much, but a band like the Ramones is a longtime favorite. And again, people are dismissive. Oh my God, they only play 3 chords and their songs are 1 minute and 30 seconds long. I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. I love them.
Did you ever feel like the music in general, pop music in general, took a left turn somewhere? Would you ever get to a point where, I'm disappointed and where this is going?
Well, yeah, probably so. And there have been little corrections here and there. There was the punk thing in the 70s,
Yeah.
which went to new wave, and some of the new wave stuff was
Now, when
good.
you say bloated, can you be specific? What was bloated to you about it?
Pretentious subject matter, long solos, that were more the musicians were having a great time, but I don't think
Nobody
too many
else was.
listeners really were. And
Yeah.
that became something prized for its own sake, and I just never got it. I want the song to say something to me, even if it's something very simple.
So you
I
went
want to
here
find
to the
something.
John Lennon point of view.
Pretty much.
Give us 3.5 minutes and
Pretty
I'm out
much.
of there.
There are exceptions. There's a few long form things that I
Yeah.
like, but mostly playing for its own sake and complexity for its own sake just didn't speak to me. Now, you had a period in the early 90s when grunge hit, and I thought that was another good correction, again, back to simplicity. And at the same time that was going on, what they called alternative rock in those days
Right.
had a pretty big 60s component and even a melodic component. There were bands coming out in the early 90s, like Gin Blossoms and people like that.
How about today? Is there anybody that you like today that's popular
Today, there's a lot of good music. You just have to dig a lot deeper to find it.
Do you feel like it's a substance thing, or is it generational for you that you can't make the real connection to what your daughter listens to and what you
I'm not
prefer?
really sure, right? Generational could be a part of it. They're speaking with, different voices than I would have spoken with, although
Yeah.
some, again, are very respectful of the music that I like and incorporate its influences, but I don't know.
As we change and we get older, we revisit, it's almost like our own personal legacy coming back to us that we revisit, and it's all new again.
For me, it's always been a part of me. I don't listen to Beatles albums a whole lot because I can run them in their entirety through my head anytime I want to. Now, I still go back and I do that, and that's true of, the Byrds and people like that. And I should have mentioned, we started to go through the bands that I love. I got to the
Byrds,
Kinks. I love the Byrds. The Yardbirds were real big with me.
Yeah.
And then, as the underground stuff hit, I was a big fan of
Did you ever get into any of the Motown things?
Oh,
or-
yeah, I like Motown a great deal.
Getting back to Davis and McKay now, are you guys still fairly active?
Yeah. I love to play, but at the same time, every once in a while, you like to have a little time off, too.
Sure.
We don't have the pressure of making set lists and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So
Now
you
you're-
try to keep it in balance.
Is it starting to grind for you a little bit yet, or are you still into that love zone?
I don't think so. I don't think. If it became too much, if I was playing every weekend and week out, it probably would start to get.
The reason why, oh, I can't stay, I have to let you go, babe. your love is all mine. That's the way it would be. But I didn't know that you were putting me on. And I'll probably feel a whole lot better when you're gone. Oh, when you're gone.
If the crowd is into what you're doing and you get appreciation, that's wonderful, that's great. But honestly, I do this for myself as much as anything. I do it for my own emotional satisfaction of what playing and singing does for me. It's still tremendously satisfying.
Speaking of, did you bring your guitar? You want to do a song for
I
us?
didn't. I wish if you'd have told me, I would have.
Oh, I wish I would have said something too, because, well, you can come back on again and we'll jam.
Be happy to. I'd look forward to that very much.
Yeah, when you come back, we'll make sure we have the instruments here and set up and a little sound thing going on. You know what? I thought about it earlier, and I thought, well, maybe I should call Mike, but I'm sure he'll have his guitar with him. You know, most musicians I know they bring their axe along just in case.
Next time for sure.
Okay, good. So what do you want to do with the rest of your life now?
What are
your goals?
Tommy, I have a song that I wrote that when I introduce it, I say this is a song about rock and roll mortality. In other words, how long can I continue to do this? I mean, it's not, aging.
Does that sound familiar, Pammy?
And I'm just talking from a physical standpoint, your physical stamina, your voice, of course.
Yeah,
Thank God my voice hasn't gone out as of yet, but it's a question that lurks in the back of your mind. How long am I going to be able to continue to do what I love? Am I going to get to a point where it's ridiculous? My God, look at that 72-year-old guy up there, still playing rock and roll and still singing silly love songs.
Tony Bennett doesn't have a problem.
Yeah, God bless him, and I love Tony Bennett, too.
Me too, and that reminds me of a story that I read, just a little short story, a long time ago about someone was interviewing Bob Dylan, and he said, the question was, your music has changed. Around the times when he was having hits like a Rolling Stone and Positively 4th Street.
Yeah.
And the guy said to him, and I think it was in Playboy magazine, he said to him, your music has changed. It's not so bluesy anymore. It's not, you've gone like to the direction of commerciality and you've lost that kind of like bluesy thing that you had to your music. And he says, well, it's hard to have the blues when you're a millionaire.
It could be. Well, Dylan's always incorporated a ton of musical influences over the years, and as we speak, his new album is a cover of Frank Sinatra songs. I don't know if you know that or not.
I saw that today, in fact.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I got to hear that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Mike, it's been a fabulous time.
Tommy,
thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much for asking
and
me.
We'll do it again next time. You got to bring your guitar.
I will do that. I enjoyed it so much.
Who am I to talk? I didn't bring a keyboard or a guitar.
There you go.
We'll see you next time. Everybody,
thanks
for viewing in. I'm Tommy Chris, Mike McKay. We'll see you next time. Take care.
No one can save us. No one can save us. Nobody can save us.
Give it away, please. Thank you very much. A little break to take, and we're back for more shortly. Thank you.
When I was down and nobody knew me, I have a poor man blues. I worked for nothing